You gave me such a hee-hee, a ha-ha when you were like, what did you say? Pride is our prettier older sister.
But she sometimes lets us drive the car.
Yeah.
And she has like a cuter Instagram, and we're still kind of figuring out how to unlock her phone.
Yeah.
We're a grungy little sister, and I think that reflects the spirit of Lethbridge.
My name is Ash Thompson.
My name is Harper Hugo.
My name is Brent.
Yes, my name is Michael Fair.
Mabuhay! My name is Melinda Verga.
We are Drag Out the Love, and you're watching Queer in Alberta.
Welcome back to another episode of Queer in Alberta, the podcast where I chat with 2S LGBTQIA+ Albertans from all four corners of the province to share their stories. I'm your host, Kels Valenzuela Delamarter. I use she, her pronouns, and I film this series right here in Treaty 7 territory in the city of Lethbridge, Alberta, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Otipemisiwak Métis government in the Alberta District Number 1. This episode spotlights a fellow lesbian. That's right, you heard right. Lesbian is the term for folks from Lethbridge. I do not make the rules. But we get to chat with my friend Brent. And Brent is a K-12 community and university educator here in Lethbridge, where he teaches students and organizations about meaningful equity and inclusion. He has taught everything from grade 2 to graduate students, but no matter where he teaches, relationships are his number one priority. Brent is an education nerd and has a couple master's degrees and is working on his doctorate in equity and inclusion in education. He likes craft beer, Spider-Man on PS5, and hanging out with his musical husband and oppositionally defiant Frenchie. Throughout the episode, you're going to hear us talk about conflict and navigating conflict, but most importantly, you're going to hear how Brent prioritizes compassion over comprehension, and you're going to hear all about it in this next episode of Queer in Alberta. Brent Saccucci, how are you doing today, bestie?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh my God, I feel like a little angel, goddess with the glow of these lights in our home studio.
You did good with Saccucci too.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's half the battle.
I was a little nervous, but if I did it wrong, correct me anytime. Valenzuela Delamarter.
Valenzuela Delamarter.
Good, really good. I'm going to ask you a question, and you have 5 seconds to answer it. So bing, bang, boom. Are you ready? It's very serious. Oat milk or regular milk?
They're both bad options. I want almond.
Good luck, babe summer or brat summer?
Brat summer.
That was fast. Drag race or drag den? If you don't know, you already lose.
Drag race.
Drag den. Lethbridge Pride Fest or Outreach?
I have to go with Outreach, but I love Lethbridge Pride.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yay. Great job.
Like now, having lived in Edmonton, Calgary, and Lethbridge.
Whoa, globetrotter.
Yes, but Alberta is so queer.
100%.
Like it's so queer. And same with other prairie provinces, like have large histories of queer and trans people. In this book called Prairie Fairies by a prof who's at the University
literally on my bookshelf right now. Yeah.
It like outlines how vast this history has been. And when I did live in Toronto, it was like, oh, you're from Alberta. How difficult and homophobic.
Yeah. How did you survive?
Right. I'm like, what? Like
actually, I thrived.
Yeah. We have a deep sense of community in Alberta that I didn't feel was matched in Toronto.
You're not the first person to tell me that on this show. Like other guests that maybe grew up in Ontario or Toronto and then moved here also comment on that community and close-knit experience. Yes. I think it's really, really special. And it like also brings me into thinking about your Globetrotter era with like you said, Lethbridge, Edmonton, Calgary. Let's talk a little bit about you, like maybe introducing yourself to the audience as well as our guest star, Hazel.
Hi, Hazel. Like it's kind of cool. It's like in couples therapy, how you see Orna's dog. That's what I envision.
I mean, Hazel she can be the star.
I'm okay with it.
But we were just about to talk about perhaps introducing you a bit before we get too excited with our conversation. Would you mind sharing your name, your pronouns, and a bit more about your work and what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Brent. I use they, he, she pronouns, and that is in any combo that folks want to use, including he. Like you can use that exclusively. I am a new lesbian as of like 6 months ago. No, probably longer, last fall.
It's getting to be a moment.
Yeah.
Almost full
It's almost been a
circle.
full year, which is wild.
Yeah.
I am a high school teacher, and I also do queer and trans 101 workshops around the city.
Yes.
For people to make more inclusive workplaces and schools.
And I can say, like, I was able to attend a Queer 101 literally like 48 hours ago or something. It was intimate. It was cute.
That's the smallest I've ever had.
No way.
Yeah.
I feel so special.
Sometimes they are quite small. And I think what I love about facilitating and teaching is the performance of it.
Okay.
And that always involves larger crowds. But with more intimate workshop settings, I can actually do more personalized work.
Sure.
Like, I actually like it now. And it was small.
No, I so saw that in your work and your approach. Like, you really have that extra time and capacity, like, give attention to the people that are there with their specific needs, maybe their education or exposure previous. I was really happy you invited me because it gave me so much to pull from for today's conversation.
Yeah. And that one will be different than the one I do in a few weeks.
Right.
That will be different from ones I've done. I'm always changing it. And that fumbling in that workshop is actually... And I think you were witness to a few fumbles, actually. And that is vital to making this workshop as good as it can be, is fumbling along and modeling fumbling and failing for them as they learn to be queer and trans affirming.
Yes. And that's like going to be something we so touch on today. Like, one thing I appreciated in your work there, but I think just as a person, you really value compassion and empathy when it comes to teaching and meeting people. So that fumbling, it shows that you don't always have to get everything quote unquote right, and that we're human and fallible. And it's so important for this kind of work.
Yes. And I often say, as maybe you heard in that workshop, that like inclusion is a felt sense. And we all know people that have pronouns in their email signature, or do a land acknowledgement, but it lacks an authenticity or a rootedness, and instead is like this cerebral activity. And I think in focusing the workshops in that compassion over comprehension part has shifted totally how I do inclusion training. It's actually, we don't need to get everything, and we won't. How do we do this human work together? And groups buy into that more, I find.
No, I think it's like people are craving that almost.
Yeah.
That essence of humanity, honestly, is what it is. Instead of striving for perfection and getting all the labels and terminology, like, yes, do your due diligence to be an empathetic and kind person, considerate to the others around you. But it doesn't mean that you're going to get everything right 100% of the time. In
fact, if you were claiming you were getting everything right,
suspicious.
I'd be worried. Yeah.
Suspicious.
That to me is the real red flag. But someone who's like, hey, I'm fumbling.
Help me out.
I'm hoping that you can help me out, and knows a valid answer too. Because I have Google and can do that. But luckily, I am signing up to do this labor. Oftentimes, there's a phrase in activist circles that's like, I'm not your personal educator. And I in fact, am. And that is because I'm consenting to doing that educational work in my day-to-day life as a teacher, but also you hired me to come here to talk about queer stuff. And so I think I view activism as a pedagogical project, as one that is deeply rooted in education. If you go to math class every day and it's like, Kels, you suck, why don't you get this?
That was actually my experience through K-12, so thank you.
And you know what I want to do if someone tells me that? I'm like, I'm going to skip class. I don't feel safe here.
I did.
Yeah. That's like a very natural response to someone saying, you're not good at this, do better.
Yeah.
So if we do activist learning like that and said, like, get to the bar, I'm not your teacher, do the work, which is at times a generative response. But I'm like, you know what that person doesn't want to do now is probably do the work. Because for people with privilege, which we all are, when you're learning about something that doesn't affect you, you have to feel like it's worthwhile, that you have a stake a skin in the game. And I think oftentimes people are like, well, activists are so rude and it doesn't feel safe and blah, blah, blah.
Opinionated,
But it's tough
whatever.
to be like slow and gentle through this work. I don't think
Yeah.
it's for everybody.
No, and like before we get too far, like you saying that, it just makes me think about how whether racialized people, marginalized peoples, we feel sometimes like we all get thrust into that role of activist or constant educator for the people that come into our lives. And I feel like you pointing out that you have the capacity to be that person and to take on that role, it's a good reminder that like the everyday queer person or your friend that's a POC might not feel the same way. It might not have that energy. And it's also on you to then not just seek all of that education from one person, but see maybe if there's a workshop you can go to or resources online, like something else that you can do that learning with for yourself.
And it's often more impactful, I often say to cis and straight counterparts, that it's actually more impactful for you to do homo and transphobia work, because what you're unraveling is cis sexism and transphobia. And it's more impactful coming from you than it is from me. It's like seen as my agenda. Of course, I'm pushing this. And it's for me as a white person, I should be the one taking on the labor of doing anti-racism work, because racism doesn't exist because of people of color. It exists because of white folks. So I think if we all took someone else's piece of the pie also, that would make for everyone to be more full at the end of it.
No, 100%. I am so happy to have you in the space and like to begin to know you more as a friend, because that perspective that you bring, like even me, I found myself learning so much in that workshop that we did together, more so about, again, the way that you talk to people and you bring them into conversation. And even if, you know, there's that fumbling we talked about or that wiggle room, like it's a journey you go on together. And that's what we're going to do today.
Love it.
I love it. But before we get ahead of ourselves, you're doing these workshops originally with Outreach Southern Alberta, but now doing them on your own. Is that right?
A little bit, yeah.
Right, okay.
So I was on the board of Outreach as their education director for the first few months when I moved here. And I'm now in a consultancy relationship with them. So me and them offer Queer 101 together. And I do queer and trans consulting already in my life. So now we're just formalizing doing Queer 101 together, which is like lovely. And I appreciate having a community focus of it with Outreach.
Yes, totally. And like, I'm just going to give a quick definition and like name explanation, I guess, of Outreach Southern Alberta Society for anybody that's listening that's not in Lethbridge or this area. So Outreach supports and advocates for the local and broader two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer, 2S LGBTQ+ communities of Lethbridge and surrounding areas. And like we said, thinking about this interview, me and Sarah, my partner, we were like, Brent literally moved here and boom, was with Outreach. Can you tell me a little bit about how you started that process and journey?
That's funny you say that, because that has always been my style. Even I used to coordinate a camp called Camp Firefly for queer and trans kids.
Heard of it. Huge fan.
Same. Loved it. I worked there for years. And I wasn't even out when I applied to be like a camp leader the first year. My way of exploring queerness.
Wait a minute, but did you know that you were queer though before you?
Yes, but Camp Firefly is housed at the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. So teachers, pre-service teachers, are exposed to it as an opportunity to get involved with kids. And so I was doing it in that vein, being like, oh, I'm just like getting to know kids, blah, blah, blah. And like what queer youth culture is like, because I want to work with queer youth.
Nothing deeper here. It's all just for the educational pedagogy.
Yeah. I think I went in like stating that I was bi and came out being like, I use he, they pronouns. So
I mean, Camp Firefly Express, right? Like she's giving.
And it's to your point of like, oh, you got involved so quick. I've always been like that. Like I'm a bit insufferable camp counselor energy already, like extroverted theater gay, but also learning to manage to like be quiet in spaces that I knew. And so like I wanted to learn the Lethbridge lay of the land and
find community.
Outreach
probably
was that
too,
space.
Eh?
Yeah. What I love about Outreach is it's like really grassroots. It's volunteer run, that we have like folks that are Indigenous, folks living with disabilities, trans people, neurodivergent people on our board, and it is, or on the board that I was on, and it is such a cool group. Like, we're not as fancy as Lethbridge Pride.
I was gonna say, in your workshop,
Yes,
you gave me such a hee, a ha when you were like, what did you say? Pride is our prettier older sister.
But she sometimes lets us drive the car.
Yeah.
And she has like a cuter Instagram, and we're still kind of figuring out how to unlock our phone.
Yeah.
We're a grungy little sister, and I think that reflects the spirit of Lethbridge. Like, Lethbridge is not trying to be Calgary.
She's not posh, you
Right.
know? Like,
and actually, it's that grunge that's kind of cool about Lethbridge, and it's queer culture. Outreach is very, like, whereas Lethbridge Pride, to my understanding, is like a big social event, a community event in June, and often throughout the year. Outreach is education, support, advocacy. And I don't do the support and advocacy. So we're talking about, like, well, I'm the personal educator because I do the education part. But they have lots of programs for kids, for trans parents.
Outreach does, yeah.
They do advocacy work with the government. I am not the first person at a rally. That is not my slice of the pie. I, like, am finding a skill set I'm good at, and that's how I'm contributing.
And I think it's worth highlighting that precisely, like, your skill set and what you specifically have contributed to this already amazing organization that's been here for a long time in Lethbridge and surrounding area. But Sarah, my partner, told me that when she was first moving to Lethbridge, same as you, she was looking for a community, and she moved during the pandemic. So you can imagine how isolating already. She signed up for exactly the workshop you do, Queer 101. This is T-Diva.
Yeah.
She signed up. It was on Zoom. She was the only person that showed up, so they canceled it. And so she was saying, from her perspective, like, the community is really responding positively to what you specifically bring to it. And, like, look at that comparison of, like, nobody to now this is something that so many people are talking about in Lethbridge.
And I'm doing one, it seems like, every other week. And
booked and busy.
Yeah, June was wild.
I feel you. I'm still recovering. What about you?
Yes.
Ugh.
But this is the first Pride that I took self-care seriously.
Okay,
like,
I was
beyond,
not that.
right.
I need to be that.
Right.
Yeah.
When you are 30, it will just demand it of you.
That's coming up, though.
Yeah.
In like 20 minutes, basically.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
I only feel like a little nervous about it, but anyway.
No, 30 is, and feeling Pride here, like Toronto Pride felt very focused on, like, bodies and sex positivity, which are really important facets of Pride. I think here it felt really grounded and community focused.
For sure.
I think, too, a lot of queer and trans and two-spirit folks struggle with substance use. And here I found that Pride was, like, so accessible beyond bar culture. And there were so many kids at Pride, at the parade.
I know.
That's what I love about this community, too. Like, it's so, not that it has a bunch of nuclear families, but that it has kids, it has older folks, kids without, or people without kids come together and celebrate. That doesn't happen in every city.
No, and I feel like, again, you talk about Alberta having stereotypes about what it's like here, demographic-wise, etc. Nobody would expect that. I think, like, from the outside looking in at Lethbridge, that like, I personally found that Pride this year, like summer 2024, was so diverse. Like, as someone that's been living here since 2014, this was the first year. I know. It's like a whole decade now. But this was the first year that I saw, like, many other people of color at Pride. And I was like, besties, where have you been? Like,
I think there's so many people that came out from the woodwork for Pride.
That's how I felt.
Like, where have you been? And it makes me be like, oh, there's just so many ways to be queer in this city. And to be clear, like, Lethbridge is not the same Alberta that's in Edmonton, where I went to school.
No.
And it's funny because Lethbridge is so different. And it's the same size as Red Deer. But it feels so different than Red Deer.
They got that whole gasoline alley vibe going on over there. You know what I mean?
And it's like Red Deer has an Edmonton, Calgary identity because it can put out an arm either way. Whereas we are the regional hub for Southern Alberta. Like, we are from Pincher Creek, you know, all the way to Brooks. Like, this is the hub. It's wild.
It's crazy. And again, like you really would miss it if you didn't come and see it. Like people aren't expecting it. And so that makes me wonder too for you. Like you even told me when you first moved here that really shocked you. That like it was, you said, surprisingly queer is how you described Lethbridge.
Right away. Like the first weekend I was here, my partner was working kind of weekly. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll come down one of those weeks and check it out. And we had this drag show at the Slice, I'm pretty sure. And Francesca was there.
Mother.
Yes.
Big respect for Mother.
Who I was like, oh my God, is this what Lethbridge drag is like?
Is this the Empress of Lethbridge, actually?
Well, then the next night we went to Empress Theater and it was Fort McLeod Pride and it was a booked theater. And we were like, what is going on here? I'm being like, this is a new chapter in Alberta Queer, the book. Like chapter 7, Lethbridge, the coolest queer spot ever. It continues to be the best place I've ever lived.
Never ending footnote.
Yeah. It's the most queer community I've ever felt.
Did you just say it's the queerest, like best place you've ever lived?
It
is that what you
is the
just
best
said?
place I've ever lived. Yeah.
Whoa.
Between like Edmonton, Calgary, and Toronto, Lethbridge is the best place I've ever lived. It is like the community here is unmatched.
I'm just gagged a little bit. Like I love hearing you say that because I feel like so many people, they just don't share that love, maybe because they've grown used to the community or been here for so long. So that perspective, like it's exciting to see people that are just like, no, this is a really, really cool place.
We want to stay. We're like, no, this is our home. Like home is a felt sense, like inclusion, right?
Yeah.
And I think setting effect, if we think about the world like as a story, and I'm an English teacher, so I probably thinking through narratively more often than I would like. The setting influences the characters who influence the plot. Like the setting in Lethbridge is one that is like really focused on solidarity, focused on community, on care, and it's humble. Like there's no clickiness amongst the queer community the way there are in larger centers. It feels like an expansive queer community where like gay men are talking to non-binary folks who are talking to disabled trans folks. Like we know we have to show up as an entire group. And that's unique about Lethbridge. It is the perfect size.
I definitely see where you're coming from. But I will say that like when I made that comment about seeing the most POC, like other folks here at Pride this year, it's not that they haven't been there, right? Like they've always been a part of this community, coming out of the woodwork for this event. But it shows that like we're gathering in maybe different places. Even a great example of that in a not so queer sense is Temptations, right?
Yes.
Downtown Lethbridge, a place for the Black community to gather.
Yes.
So it's like, it's not that Lethbridge isn't cliquey or like cliquey in a bad sense, but I still feel like we are working on broadening it up a bit in terms of everybody coming together.
And I think that won't get to a point where we're like, nailed it.
Exactly. It's ongoing.
Yes. And it's going to look like really non-linear. I would be concerned if one person was like, we've just found the secret sauce to community.
Again, red flag.
Right.
Red flag.
Community is messy, and it like being accountable to people in the community. What I love about Lethbridge is some people say it's gossipy or everyone knows your business. I'm like, for me, I would rather that than anonymity culture that like Calgary had or Toronto had in my experience.
Wow.
Like I like being accountable to what I say. And if I hurt someone, like I love going to queer 101 workshops and like you saw, I ran into a colleague there that I didn't know I had at another school.
Right.
And was like, I love this. This is so Lethbridge core to see.
It is.
That we're all so tethered. It's quite relational.
So really, it looks like you've had that whole understanding of Lethbridge just pushed wide open, dove right into it. And one way that this ties back to the workshops is how like you've shared that when you were first kind of thinking about them and how you were going to deliver them to people, you were like, do I introduce a really familiar tool like the genderbread is it genderbread person?
Yeah.
But then you realize like people have got this down pat and covered. So you've been changing how you deliver these workshops. Can you talk a bit more about the content and where it's going now? Yeah,
that's a good distinction that like from what I mentioned earlier, like compassion over comprehension is my guiding principle. Because like and same with like as a teacher, you don't come away from high school being like, I had an awesome lesson on Macbeth. You're like, oh, when I was in that room, I felt like I mattered. I was a part of a community and people cared about me. My absence was known when I wasn't there. And so we take these like feelings as footprints, and I'm trying to move my inclusion consulting and equity workshops into like, I used to be like, here's all the terms for gender and sexuality. And then I'm like, these are changing too often.
Oh my God.
And it's no longer useful to be like, hey, well, you get an inclusion badge. It'll expire in 6 months. This world that is both digital and youth focused, queer culture, is always flipping on its head, which is great. That's what we love about queerness, is it's a constant disrupting force. And so I'm no longer being like, these are all the identities. You can Google those. I'm instead trying to focus on how do we foster these attitudes and values rather than just content, because the content will expire.
Oh my God.
And the content is culturally specific to different groups. It is, if I want to like do justice to what it means to think about queer and trans culture in relation to coloniality, to ability, to race, to religion, I'm like, I'm doing a doctoral thesis on it and I still don't know. So let's instead focus on like, how do we fumble and fail with one another and call each other in to have ongoing conversations. So the workshop is switched to be more participant focused too. You probably saw everyone spoke in that workshop. Whereas like a lot of training, I'm the
On
expert.
mute.
Yeah. I'm the knower. You're the knowee. I transfer queer knowledge to you. Now you're inclusive. And it's
I
like,
just got the ick.
right,
You know what I mean?
that doesn't work.
No.
That's also not pedagogically sound. Like that's not good instructional practice.
Get them.
Yes.
Get them.
Let's talk about this. And I used to be like, oh no, people keep raising their hand and talking about their story. And then I was like, we're talking about people.
That's what it should be.
It should be about stories the whole time. Let's get off topic. I have never made it through that entire slide deck. And I hope I don't.
That's so real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We like get carried away on what came into the room with us. And you're from there and no way I work there. Do you know my sister? I remember you from this. And suddenly we're going back and forth and we're reminiscing about how did we not know each other before. And that becomes the inclusion in the room instead of the slide PowerPoint.
No, and it's a cute PowerPoint. Don't get me wrong.
Right, thanks.
I noticed Canva slay.
Yeah.
But I so hear you. Like it was just really, really beautiful to watch because, yeah, you were able to recognize what that space needed and modify and adapt. And I think that's the way this education needs to move forward.
And I used to not be like that, to be clear. Like,
oh, yeah?
I have been a teacher in multiple capacities for a decade. And my teaching, when I did it with Camp Firefly, I used to do Queer 101's Firefly in Schools. Is what it's called.
Yeah.
It was way not this good. Like,
was
this
it like,
takes a
here is
long
my
time.
podium? Like,
and like, I think I didn't want to hear the room because I was afraid of the mess it would create.
ooh.
But actually, I started seeing mess as something quite queer.
Yeah, 100%.
Like this is messy work, and we got to lean into it together.
Well, no real growth is ever just going to be easy and
Right.
clean and linear, right?
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, anytime it's clean and linear, I'm a bit suspicious. I'm like, I think real learning means mess. And that's what these Queer 101. So you'll see that like we had a participant that was like, oh, this just isn't matching what I want.
Right when I had to leave, I was so interested
Right.
in where that was going to go.
You honor it. You can be uncomfortable by it, but that's different than you being unsafe. Like, to be clear, discomfort is vital to any workshop.
For sure.
But if you're feeling unsafe, then we need to think of a way that you can rejoin the room. And that often comes off me.
Right.
I need to make you feel safer. But yeah, like you sitting with the discomfort of terms and us having generative conversation about how different generations talk about terms
absolutely.
is okay. And we can like be uncomfortable. But I also say, I think people are afraid to say queer and trans, but like disabled, it's not a
bad
dirty
word.
word. Like you can say queer and trans. And I think going around giving that messaging to workshop participants has been difficult for the people who queer hurts a lot.
Yeah.
And so I try and be like, can we say queer, trans, or gender and sexual minorities? I'm noticing though, people don't want to say it so much. They're so afraid of saying the wrong thing. They don't talk about us.
Queer or trans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the acronym. They're like 2S LGBTQIA plus. But
and then
I'm
they get the
missing
panic.
the panic
Yeah.
that I'm like, oh, I can tell you're not, intentionally not talking about queerness because you don't want to fumble.
And that's the problem, right? Because then there's no conversation, no education, no room for learning because it's just not addressed out of fear of, again, mistakes.
So people are now not talking about it in workplaces, in schools, because they're like, I don't want HR to call me.
Problematic. Yeah.
Right. And I empathize with that. I'm like, and if there's one thing you can take from my workshops, it's like, it's okay to fail.
Yeah, it's okay to get things wrong. And it's like about the intention, right? Because even I've talked about this before with like previous workplaces in terms of Indigenous heritages or experiences within where I was working at the time. This consensus was more so we're not going to talk about it because we don't want to get it wrong. But then it's not even there. It's just missing and absent, which isn't right either.
Like that actually is the real danger.
It's worse, way worse.
That's the real danger. And I think like, it's tough. People don't want to talk about politics right now. They don't want to talk about belonging. Like we are in a point where we're like, I'd rather be silent than participate in any type of socio-political conversation. And I think that's the most dangerous spot to be in.
Especially,
silence.
Yeah. Like I was even thinking of Pride this year in terms of like in my memory, I might be wrong. And if I am, for sure, anybody that's listening with better knowledge, feel free to correct me. I'd love to know. But I gave this speech at City Hall this year. You were there and there were the protesters. In the 10 years I've been living in Lethbridge, I don't recall seeing protesters like that at a Pride flag rising or anything like that. So it's a sign that even though it is uncomfortable, especially for our allies who have the privileges that we do not, you need to get uncomfortable and speak up for us right now.
In fact, I would say that discomfort is a reasonable barometer to gauge your allyship.
Why does it make you uncomfortable? What is it?
You can tell you're doing good allyship if you're uncomfortable. If you're like generally breezing through the day with conversations around indigeneity and race, you probably like are benefiting from a system of privilege. And so if my allyship is directly tethered to how uncomfortable I am, I need to speak up more then. Like I think discomfort's a good litmus test to how meaningful your allyship work is. You know, if you're like, I just repost, I'm like, that's pretty low stakes. What about the interview process that you're in right now? What about your in-laws? What about talking to government?
Yes. And using your voice and the fact that you don't have as much risk in speaking up on these things as those of us from vulnerable populations.
Which is tough. It's so tough because like, I get it. People don't want to get fired. They don't want their in-laws to not like them. They don't want to say the wrong thing. How do we hold space for like, yes, this is tough and you can do hard things?
I think that's where people like you who have had that experience, and even to some degree people like me, like I often think I'm so grateful for my queerness because it made me so much stronger. And like even when we were in your workshop and talking about like being proud of how despite some of those harder, uglier things I've had to go through, I didn't lose my empathy or my ability to connect with somebody and meet them where they are and have those conversations. I feel like that is such a superpower that queer people have almost all the time, it seems. And so again, it's not to say that we should take on that extra labor, but it's a moment where we can show just by modeling through our daily lives and actions how you can be brave enough to do those things.
Like, I think a lot of people will say about their experiences, I wouldn't change it after they come out on the other side of a breakup, a bad mental health episode, moving different countries. They will say like, my experience shaped me. And that's what Pride is about, is claiming those experiences as vital and colorful and crucial to being who we are today. That's why we go around and say, what is something that you're proud of that you don't get to talk about? Yeah.
It was such a good question to open up your interview, or not interview, your workshop that you did.
Yes. Because we don't get to talk about what pride means.
Yeah.
But to be proud, like we have to tap into ourselves and be like, right, I actually am excited by myself.
Hey, self-love.
Right. And that my pride isn't contingent on people praising me. It's contingent on me congratulating myself.
And that's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's a good thing to feel that way about yourself. Like so many things that I had to deconstruct for myself in terms of like relationships, self-love, etc., that I don't think I would have done at the same time or nearly to the same degree if I didn't have to experience being queer as well.
And I think people with like mental health challenges, people who have had any version of adversity on the other side often speak of that, or even during it, being like, I still wouldn't trade it.
Exactly.
It makes me like softer, move through this world gentler, and be a better person in relation with one another.
And appreciate things more. I don't know. I'm having like this whole like goosebumpy moment as we're talking about this in Lethbridge, Alberta, of all places, like to have this conversation about how our lives have just been so blessed in some ways, if not definitely by this experience. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like just you talking about that hunger and excitement for the work that you do. That's something that right now more than ever, I want to amplify, because I feel like so many of even just my own friends in the community and myself, we're feeling bogged down by that negative news feed cycle. You open your phone and it's like hatred or trauma all over the place in respect to our identities and community. So it's nice to be able to break that and say, well, look at what's also happening in Alberta that you might not be seeing in the regular news.
That's so tough. I mean, I intentionally follow decently conservative news outlets.
Just to keep an eye on it, hey?
And to be like, my worst fear is that I get into an insular algorithmic bubble and that I'm like, oh, everyone is surely feeling this. Right.
Yeah.
But it's just not the case. Like, I like to be on that side, the conservative news outlets and media platforms and TikToks, to see how these people think. And that influenced my doctoral research, is being like, how do we if I'm a teacher that has to show up for everyone, that means everyone. And so how do I show up for those families and those students? Like, I have taught university the last 5 years, and I have almost every single class have usually what appears as a white male, like really push back on some topics.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to be like, I don't have time for this, like blah, blah, blah. This isn't my labor. And now I'm like, no, I'm your educator.
And you're ready to do that though, too, right?
So true. And that for people who can't do that gentleness and softness, there's going to be other ways, and particularly like racialized communities who are often tone policed anyway. I can see it being especially cumbersome to ask of them. But that I'm like, okay, how do I talk to this kid? And especially if like the whole class has to be witness to their opinion, how do I facilitate that?
Yeah, you probably just feel every single eye on you in that moment, hey? Because it's like everyone sees that tension point and is wondering what you're going to do with it.
They do. They look at me, they look at the kid, me, then the kid, the student in university, whoever it is. And what I do in that moment is look back at the rest of the group.
Okay.
And I'm like, we all need to hold space for this. So who wants to respond to what we're hearing? I often say, I'm willing to be challenged. Are you willing to be challenged on that? Sometimes they're like, no. Like, I'm not willing to have conversations anymore about the gender pay gap being real or not real.
Right.
The evidence is clear. It's real. It's not a debate we're going to have. We should instead then have a debate about misinformation and like choosing correct sources.
True.
Some things I am willing to have a debate on, but I want to empower the room to be like, what are you going to say between me and a student? Who do you want to prompt for argument and evidence? What does it mean to compromise and see both sides?
I love that you started off with like, because the reason I'm just like asking about this right now is because it's so fascinating and relevant. Like, I've been in that situation where there's differing opinions in the room and it can easily get so heated and nobody hears anybody, like just like a bubble about to explode, right?
And there's like prerequisites for those conversations that I never knew until I started seeing this work as very educational. Like, I often ask people, like, are you willing to be wrong?
That's exactly it. Like, and that you open with that.
Oftentimes they'll be like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, sweet, there's a combo here to be had. But other times they will say, no, that's like, I just thought about it. And there's actually nothing you can say to change how I feel about this. And I have things about that too.
Yes. Yeah.
There's just no conversation then, though.
Mm-hmm.
So let's save each other's emotional reservoirs for when there actually is compromise on the table as a viable option.
Mm-hmm. No, like immediately I'm like, what a weight off of the shoulders that would be to just be like, okay, we are going to disagree. Let's leave it instead of having it up. Because that's what I find most people get stuck in. It's just you trying to reason, but you're not hearing each other and you're not going to hear each other.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I'm interested now saying like, what is the strategy to use? And
that's what I was going to ask you. Like
the emergent research or the research I'm interested in takes an approach called narrative inquiry, which is to be like, tell me about your story. Talk to me about your life. Let's not talk about this as it's something that is abstract and just exists in a theoretical context. Let's talk about our skin in the game. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you about how I've been hurt and you tell me how you've been hurt. And it's through taking this more human approach to talking around equity that we see people shift. Mm-hmm. We see people saying, I'll move a step closer if you do. And when it's like gets off of the TikTok comment section and into face-to-face and we hear each other's voice shake and we see the tears in the eyes and then I visualize yourself as a person with this whole narrative. It's like, yeah, maybe I didn't think about this way.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying like
story,
whether through the workshops or through your just like life in general, using this story-based approach, this human compassion first, you've seen huge success with it.
I have. I think it's a big difference. Like I had done some training a while ago and someone left the room being like, this is too much. You're shoving it down our throats.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And instead of being like, this isn't my labor, I'm instead like, let me bring back the humanness in this. Instead of me as a knower, the woke person, the one who has this knowledge and you pushing back on it, let's see human to human. Mm-hmm. And once they have that prerequisite, we can actually go to pretty cool places, me included. Mm-hmm. Instead of being like, oh, this person's so bigoted, blah, blah, they're never going to see it. Like, instead, if I'm like, who is this person?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is really like, even just for me on a personal note, super inspiring to hear about, because I feel like when it's something I'm prepared for, like say I'm going to go have a conversation with a difficult relative that I don't see eye to eye with, I'm already expecting that I might have to be a bit on the defense or like match their energy, figure it out that way. But I find like if it's happening and catches me off guard, even like looking on different experiences, your emotions can kind of skyrocket right away and like fight or flight a little bit. So to hear like that you actively take that moment to just kind of like pause, reset, assess the situation, that makes me feel like, okay, if I'm in that position again, let's try that and see the difference that might make.
And I don't say like, I'm going to pause and reset and blah, blah, blah. In those moments, I'm asking like, where can I pivot to?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
that's a better way to say it.
Am I willing to be wrong? Mm-hmm. Is this up for challenge? Am I asking something of them that I'm not willing to give myself? Mm-hmm. But sometimes I will name like, I'm feeling like I'm not regulated and this is no longer a generative conversation. Mm-hmm. I think we need to like gain some ground rules and then come back because I know you to be a great person. Yeah. And I want to do right by you by leaving when it gets too much. And that's just like conflict resolution 101.
Mm-hmm. Which not everyone is literate in, you know?
Instead, we're like deeply polarized as a society, and the classroom is becoming this microcosm for that polarization. And I am more interested in building bridges than saying you're on this side of the room and you're on this. Like that fuels violence ultimately. Like it's called the Swarf hypothesis theory, and it's the idea that
hit me with it.
Yeah, it's the idea that like words make language, language makes beliefs, make values, make culture, make norms, make laws.
My ADHD is working with you right now. I'm like, okay, yeah.
So words, things that are so silly, like, when I say hey guys, you know what I mean. And in my workshop, they'll be like, Brent, this is getting a bit ridiculous. I'm like, well, would you go into a classroom and be like, hey, whites? And you'd be like, you know what I mean when I say that. Like, I meant all races. And it's like, right. But when you take guy as the baseline of normal, of course you meant all genders when you said guy. Because guys, like, because whites is neutral to you. When in fact, it comes coded too, socially and culturally. So these words, they matter, you know, and they add up and they make laws. So even in my classroom, I'm like, let's be really intentional about how we describe each other, ourselves, and our words, because those words make the story of the book of life. You know what I mean?
Okay,
we have to be picky.
I see you now.
Because those words end up making laws. Being like, just saying, ladies and gentlemen, ends up turning into like, if we follow this hypothesis, creates values, norms, laws, ultimately in like courts. It does. All these little moments do matter.
No, I think that one thing I noticed in those workshops is how like this is all can be maybe very overwhelming for someone to think about for the first time, right? But you were able to make it piecemeal and make it small. And I think that's something that really marks you as a true educator. Like you really are meant for what you do.
Thank you.
I mean it, seriously.
I feel that. I'm one of the rare people who was like, in grade 5, what do you want to be? I was like, a teacher.
I wish.
Yes.
I did not have that direct superset highway.
I think that's normal. I think a lot of people don't. I knew immediately that I wanted to be on the other side of that desk because it was learning environments that allowed me to grow and change. But I think especially teachers are seen to be moral agents of society. Like we have to be.
Increasingly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like that you're a teacher 24/7. And that can be dangerous thinking too, because if we're actually to model authentic learning, we have to model failure too.
Oh my God. Is that the mic drop of the episode? I think it might be.
Let's do it. Because it's tough. Like I often in class am like, I don't know the answer. Let's Google it together. And then the conversation becomes about what source we should pick from the Google first page. Instead of, I don't want to be a knower and have no-ease. I want to like leverage the lived experience and facilitate. I see my teaching as facilitation more than direct lecturing. And although there's times for that too.
But I feel like that facilitation, maybe again, it's just because I have ADHD. That was the stuff that got me in the classroom rather than just sitting and having someone lecture facts to you. Do you know what I mean? That invitation.
Oh my God, same. Same. And especially if I'm like to do diverse texts and talk about current events in social studies, I need to, it can't just be the Brent show.
No.
And because of course I'm going to leave
I
that
do
class.
like the Brent show though.
I do too.
She's kind of my favorite.
Everyone loves their own show, but I love sharing that spotlight, and I want to do it more as I get older. I don't need the mic all the time actually anymore. And I think that's indicative of like growing up and seeing what piece of the pie is yours. I want to do transformative work, and it requires me then to be vulnerable and model failure, and that's tough in a world where we value expertise, perfection,
which inattainable standard,
right? But like I don't know many people that have had a teacher that cries in front of them or that has like talked about their own racial or queer or trans identity. A lot of us would be like, I never had a racialized teacher in Alberta. I never had a queer or trans teacher. And so it's wild.
No, and I feel that even on like a personal note where at some point growing up, I was always very outspoken about being Filipino and like so proud of that identity. But there came a point where I almost felt like I couldn't talk too much about it, or it's not professional to be so personal. But that's totally been something that shifted in just my life, like how I understand myself, my personal philosophy, as well as my work. I believe that is a fundamental strength that we all bring, regardless of like whether you're queer, trans, straight, racialized. Like those stories are what make us who we are and make us, I don't know, it makes the work we do special. So when you opened your workshop with like that introduction to you, it lets people know you instantly.
Right.
And then you feel that realness.
But we're so afraid to be known.
Mm-hmm.
We are so afraid to be known and seen.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, like what Brene Brown reminds us is inclusion and belonging is being seen in your fullness and complexity and still feeling like you belong.
Yeah.
But what isn't inclusion is pretending to be professional, which, to be clear, often means no accent, a certain body, a certain ability. All of those things we call professional, like they're neutral things.
Mm-hmm.
When we see two women in business suits talking, it's called getting business done. It's called professionalism. But when we see two men with a limp wrist and a vocal fry wearing pink, we call it gay.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird that professionalism is so coded. And we have cool people doing work in that, about being like, it's called heteroprofessionalism, this term. Robert Mizzi, a
Learning
prophet.
so much from you today.
Yes.
Heteroprofessionalism.
Heteroprofessionalism, being like, professionalism is deeply wrapped up in
and I see it,
all these
right?
things that are influenced by coloniality.
Even though this is very much coming from that queer and trans perspective, because that's the focus of the show, our lived experiences, what I'm thinking is going to be so really interesting for listeners is how you're teaching them in this moment how to have difficult conversations in all areas of your life. You don't have to be within the community to benefit from some of the things you've shared with us. So immediately, thank you.
Well, I'm passing it along. Like, knowledge is always shared. I got this from someone. I'm happy to pass it along to someone else. And then they take it and make it their own and pass it on. Like, I didn't realize this work was about difficult conversations for the first few years.
Yeah.
I thought it was about gaining a sense of like ultimate anti-racism, anti-homotransphobia. And then it could be this like educator for everybody in anti-oppression. It made like, that's been a recent shift in growing as a educator, that like, I need to have difficult conversations. That's been a growing shift of being a person, being a better partner, a friend, son.
What advice like would you maybe give to anyone listening who's struggling with those things, maybe with a family member or a friend? How would you have those conversations?
You know, I mean, starting is the biggest. Like, I always say to students, the biggest obstacle to being heard is a blank page, staring at the text you haven't sent, the email that continues to go unread because it requires too much of you. The first thing to do is start. And it only takes 3 seconds of courage to like ask someone to the prom, to hit send on the email, to tell someone I'm queer. It just takes 3 seconds. And if you count it even in your head, 3 seconds, and then I say it, I raise my hand, I hit send, that it actually becomes a little bit more manageable. And to do that every day, take 3 seconds of courage each day. Like 3 seconds of courage, it takes me 3 seconds to quickly send this text, to do this thing that I need to do. We can start living more courageous lives. I would say that courage is actually a deep part of this work. Like, think about wanting to avoid conflict. Like, we do that with the people we're supposed to be safest with, our partners, our parents, our siblings. We're trying to avoid conflict all the time. I think we need to reorient our conversations to be like, conflict, as you know, Sarah Schulman says, conflict is not abuse.
And conflict can be just a part of life,
yes,
of every day.
Conflict is vital. And conflict means I'm facing the humanity of these conversations and treating them with the humanity they deserve. And if we want to live authentically, we have to say, how do I do conflict in a way that still prioritizes compassion and empathy and not arguing? And a lot of times, like, be aware of yourself. We're not, at least like when I get into any conflict with people in my own life, I'm like, I'm too activated. Like, I'm no longer here. I'm in another space. I'm not giving this what it deserves. I need to take time alone. I need to like write on my notes app, do whatever I need, call a friend, and then come back, because I'm just not showing up in the way that you deserve or this conversation does. I think for people that are like, I know I need to have conversations and I'd rather not do them, I would say you deserve an authentic life. You deserve conflict and all of the gifts that it brings. Our like disgust for bad feelings. There's a theorist, Sarah Ahmed, that talks about like the morning migrant, I think it is, and she also coined the term feminist killjoy, is that like this idea of us always needing to have like good, pretty feelings is this promise of happiness that we're never going to reach. Like if we start to reframe bad feelings or bad affective emotions as part of doing just humanity, living as a human on this messy world that looks like it's crumbling, then we're actually tapping into a more authentic version of life. We're not being lied to, and we're not lying to ourselves. Like the other day, I wanted to like actually have a big cry in my car about the wildfires and about our climate crisis and the grief that it gives me. But I didn't feel like it would be appropriate to. It felt like cringy. It felt like pick me energy. But I want to mourn. And conflict and tension within us and with people in our lives is part of feeling the fullness of humanity. And I want the fullness of humanity. I only have one life. Like, I really want to get into it. I want to sit in the mud and the dirt. And having hope in this moment is perhaps the queerest thing we can do. If we take seriously that queerness means against the grain, put somewhere it doesn't belong, is inappropriate to have at this moment, hope is the queerest thing we can do right now.
I love that you said that. And I just literally listening to that, I feel so inspired, like reassured. And I think so much of this conversation, again, like you are an educator teaching people not only how to navigate difficult conversations for queer community, trans community here in Alberta, but highlighting how so much of it is knowing yourself and what you have capacity for and setting those boundaries and saying it's okay to grieve or it's okay to experience these emotions. I feel like, especially for me, if this resonates with anyone listening, like I really came from a world where I had to keep it together and like have a brave face, and it was a sign of strength not to burden other people with your emotional baggage or whatever is going on. Yes. But that is a fundamental weakness, in my opinion, from my own experience and speaking just to that. Right. It's the vulnerability and the ability to be authentic about how you're feeling. That's been the game changer for me.
And I think that will directly impact queer and trans kids. It'll impact our community. Like those are, you know, molecules that we can insert in any different part of our life. This ability to be vulnerable, have tough conversations, and not feeling a sense of perfectionism. We could all queer our lives, queer as verb. We can all queer our lives a bit more too. Do things differently. And how many more possibilities of humanity will we be open up to when we queer our lives?
No, I love it. Queer our lives, 3 seconds of courage.
Yes, right.
And hope is the queerest thing that we can have right now. I love it. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for everything that you do for the community here in Lethbridge, for coming onto my show, and for sharing just a bit of your perspective with my audience today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my God. No, you can come over and kiki whenever you want, Brent.
Yeah, I love this. I love the couch, so I 100% will be back.
I mean, she looks good on you. She does. You smashed it out of the park for Queer in Alberta Season 3, and I want to give you the opportunity to look into this camera here. If you have any social media or projects that you want to share, if not, that's totally okay. You can just sign off and say whatever you want to say.
Call me, beat me if you want to reach me, as Kim Possible would say. Google me online and we can connect. I want to bring a Queer 101 to you.
Yes, this is my gay agenda, 100%.
Yes, 100%. So let's connect. We can go to outreachsa.org and let's get a Queer 101 at your school or workplace.
Which after this episode, I think everybody's going to be signing up to do a Queer 101 with Brent. I know I already did and plan on going again.
Yay.
Perfect. Well, thank you. That's a wrap. Coming up next on Queer in Alberta.
Yeah, queerness didn't really come into the picture for me until high school when like
What was your queer awakening? I'm just curious.
I started going on Tumblr.
Oh my god, lesbians unite.
It was like I think I was like grade 7 or 8, like 2007, 2008. Like,
Diva, Tumblr got us all. Like, come on.
I was just gay.
You were just
gay.
gay, period.
Yeah.